General John W. Raymond is the Chief of Space Operations, U.S. Space Force, and a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is a senior uniformed officer responsible for the organization, training, and equipping of all organic and assigned space forces in the U.S. Armed Forces. He also serves as an advisor to the President, Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council.
Welcome to the stage, General Raymond. You have the floor.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon. It sure is an honor to be here today at the National Guard Association of the United States. And thanks, Major General McGuire, the chairman. Thank you for having me here today. It's truly an honor to be here, and I'm excited to share a few remarks with you. But before I do, let me just say thanks for the remarkable work that our Guardsmen are doing each and every day for our nation, for your states, and for your communities. Today, I join a very grateful nation in expressing our deep and sincere gratitude for your service and the sacrifices that you have made as citizen soldiers and airmen. You are always ready, and you're always there to fight our wars and to support our homeland security. And we've asked a lot of you this last couple of months, and you've delivered without fail. So thanks. I'd also like to say thank you for the work that you do in the space mission. The National Guard has been critical partners to us, operating space electronic warfare capabilities, missile warning capabilities. We couldn't do our job without you, and we can't do that today, and we won't be able to do that in the future. So again, hats off to all those that are on the watch today, securing our nation. You know, let's transition a little bit into the remarks about space. And what I would suggest to you is today we're seeing the largest change in the global security environment that we've seen in a generation. And I will tell you, in space, it may be even actually a little bit longer than a generation. And what we've learned over the last few decades is that space power is absolutely systemic to our national power. It fuels our American way of life. It fuels our American way of war. It fuels our economy. There's nothing that we do as a nation that isn't enabled by space. We've had the absolute luxury here over the last few decades to take space for granted, if you will. There hasn't been a threat. It's been a benign and peaceful domain, and as long as you could launch a rocket, get a satellite in orbit, and it would survive what we called infant mortality, that it worked when it got onto orbit, that's all you really had to worry about. You had to worry about making sure things didn't collide in space, but you didn't have to worry about a threat. That's not the case today. And today, the scope, scale, and complexity of that threat is alive and well. Everything from reversible jamming of GPS and communication satellites to directed energy capabilities to on-orbit activities that are very, very concerning, direct ascent missiles, cyber. There's multiple threats that we have to be concerned about, and there's multiple threats that are placing our satellites at risk. And if you take anything from my talk, I'd ask you to take the next few points. First of all, space is a warfighting domain just like air, land, and sea. I would also tell you that although that rolls off our lips pretty easy today, that space is a warfighting domain, the second piece I would ask you to take away from this talk is that the implications of that fact are really significant. And then finally, and this echoes a little bit with what General Brown, my good friend General Brown just talked about, is we have to move at speed to stay ahead of that growing threat and to stay ahead of our adversaries and competitors. So the United States, in response to this, elevated both the warfighting aspect of space with U.S. Space Command, which I just note that today, the 29th of August, marks the first anniversary, the first birthday of that warfighting command after it was reestablished back in 2019. So on the warfighting side, we elevated it from a component of U.S. Strategic Command to its own combatant command. And then just a few months later, the United States Space Force was established when the National Defense Authorization Act was signed back on 20 December 2019. Until last week, I had the privilege of leading both of those. And I was really privileged and proud to hand off the flag of U.S. Space Command to General Jim Dickinson, who is going to take that command and elevate it in the years ahead. But I will tell you that both of those organizations, both the warfighting and the organized train and equip aspects, were purpose-built to do what we need to do in space to deter conflict, to compete, and if deterrence were to fail, to win. Again, General Brown talked about the need to accelerate change. I actually have a much easier job than General Brown. He has to take an organization and transform it. We get an opportunity to start with a clean sheet of paper in the United States Space Force and to be bold in our efforts and to start fresh on everything, on how we do professional development, how we build our architectures in space, how we do the force design. All of that can start from scratch. And so what I thought I would do to prime the pump for some questions is just walk you through a little bit of some of the big focus areas that we're focusing on the Space Force. Primary job after standing up in December is to build the Space Force that we need. That Space Force is a global force. It is a bold force. It's an innovative force, and it is able to go fast. That Space Force attracts and develops talent in a new way. That Space Force has partners, both intelligence partners, allies, commercial, to provide incredible advantage to us. In fact, I just got off the plane from Japan a little over 24 hours ago, where I had the privilege of meeting with Prime Minister Abe to talk about and solidify the partnerships with that country. We're working partnerships across the world. Again, capitalizing on our industry, our innovative industry, which in my opinion is one of our national strengths. This Space Force that we're building has to be connected across all domains, linking sensors to shooters. And to do that, it has to be a digital force, and it has to be data-driven. Primary focus in building the Space Force we need is to empower a very lean and agile service. A war that extends into space, begins or extends into space, is going to be fought over great distances and at tremendous speeds. In my opinion, big organizations are slow, and big organizations won't be able to move fast enough to do what it needs to do in space. I am convinced that we have to go fast. We must be small, we must be agile. And I'll tell you, over the first 7 months or so of business, we have been in the business of slashing bureaucracy. As we've organized the Space Force, we've already slashed 2 layers of command out of our field commands. We've reduced the headquarters size, the planned headquarters size significantly from well over 1,000 to less than 600 folks. And we think by doing so that we're going to empower people, we're going to shorten the decision space, or the space between decision makers and folks doing the work. And we're going to increase our accountability and increase our speed. So we're excited about that going forward, and I think that's going to pay us huge dividends. The other thing that we need to do is we need to deliver warfighting capabilities, and we need to do it rapidly. And so the United States Space Force must first defend the capabilities that we have in space. They're the world's best capabilities, and they provide our nation incredible advantage. However, they weren't built in an era of a contested domain, and we need to bridge to a new force design, a more defendable force structure, reducing that first mover advantage and closing the warfighting construct for the warfighter. As an armed service, we also have to develop an offensive punch. The UCP for U.S. Space Command is pretty clear. It says the U.S. Space Command commander will conduct offensive and defensive operations. We've got to develop that as we move forward in the future. We also have to figure out what other capabilities need to go to space. For example, as small satellites become more operationally relevant, we feel that there are other missions that will be viable. And so tactical level ISR, for example, with direct downlink to services in the field. And then you have to be able to do all this at speed without breaking the Treasury. And this is not the business model that we have today. The business model that we have today, again, was a business model built for a benign domain where speed really wasn't all that important, and where there were small numbers of satellites, and they're very, very expensive. That's not the business model that we need in the strategic environment that we face today. To do all this, we're convinced that you have to build this service as a digital service, and we're committed to building the Space Force from the ground up as the first service that is a digital service. Fully leveraging data. A lot of the challenges that we face in space are big data challenges. Fully leveraging artificial intelligence and machine-to-machine learning. We're building a digital workforce with a digital university, increasing the digital fluency of all of the folks in the Space Force. And we're creating a digital headquarters. And then finally, I think probably the thing that will give us the biggest advantage is adopting digital engineering as our standard for developing these capabilities. What gives us the most strength, however, though, are our personnel. And the National Defense Authorization Act that established the United States Space Force provides us the opportunity to develop warfighting professionals differently. We must attract, educate, and develop joint-minded space warfighters. That's space professionals that have a better understanding of joint warfighting. And then on the other end of the spectrum, take traditional joint warfighters and give them more space smarts, make them more space-minded. And so we're tackling that from both ends of the spectrum. I would encourage each of you if you haven't already, to read our brand new capstone doctrine called Space Power. Just as any new service, if you're going to be a service, you have to have doctrine. So we developed this doctrine. We're proud of the doctrine. And we know we don't have it 100% right, but I will tell you it's a great document, and it's a chance to begin the conversation of where we need to go into the future, providing independent options in, from, and to space. And then finally, before I open it up to questions, I think the other thing that Space Force provides is an opportunity to be a disruptive innovator for the Department of Defense. Again, we have an opportunity to start from scratch. And as I tell my team, we've got two risks. One is that we don't think bold enough, and two is that as we think bold, that we've got to be able to get the innovation implemented. And so, as I also tell the team, if we get this right, all the other services will be tapping on our shoulders, looking over our shoulders, saying, boy, I wish I had what they had. Because if we haven't thought bold enough. Our first step was to flatten out our force, and I talked to you a little bit about that. Getting rid of layers of command, reducing bureaucracy, being able to go faster. We're now targeting flattening the bureaucracy inside the Pentagon. You know, over the last few years, Congress highlighted as the conversation about the Space Force was being discussed or underway. They highlighted about 65 different organizations that had a hand in space acquisition. There's close to 30 different organizations that either internal or external to the department that have a role, some kind of role in the architecture, if you will, or the force design of space. Space Force is the mandate for change. We're working hard to bring unity of effort across the department, slashing duplication of effort, accelerating change and getting capability onto orbit faster, and in doing so, reducing cost. All to deliver the warfighting capability to our nation that we need to deter, compete, and if deterrence were to win, fail to win. And so with that, I look forward to your questions. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share a few thoughts on the brand new service, the United States Space Force. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, General Raymond. You know, we are very, very proud of you as a fellow blue suitor for your selection as the first Chief of Space Operations. And you mentioned today in your remarks the idea that you need to move fast, you need to be agile, you need to be able to consolidate and quickly be innovative. And you know, in the Guard, we have a long history of innovating and recapitalizing legacy fleets, but we know that you need to modernize and get new equipment. What's your thought about how to be innovative as a Space Force and work with commercial partners and others, and those of us in the Guard, to be the most innovative force out there?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest strengths our nation has is our industry. And you know, the capabilities that we operate today are the world's best, and the capabilities that we're going to operate in the future are the world's best. So what you're seeing, though, in the space domain is and this is a really terrible word to use when you're talking about space, but an explosion, if you will, of what we call new space companies. And they're being very innovative. They're building a business model that's kind of the assembly line business model. Let me give you an example. I went out to visit SpaceX back a year ago, January. And I went to their satellite making factory, and there really wasn't a factory. It was a room. No satellites were in there. Really no equipment was in there to speak of. And 4 months later, they launched 60 satellites. So they built the factory, built the satellites, integrated them on a launch vehicle, and launched them. That speed is what we need. And so we are working with and there's many examples of that. We're working with all of commercial industry to be able to pick up that pace. And so we're excited about that. I think you're going to see us rely much more heavily on commercial industry across the spectrum. I think you're going to see us with a force design that will be a hybrid, some really exquisite capabilities with other capabilities that are operationally good enough and that you can get on orbit quickly and at low costs.
Thanks for that, sir. We know that if you're looking for partners that can help you innovate, we are embedded in every county and every state in this great nation and can help you with that. As you build out the Space Force, what's your short and long-term goals for establishment of the force you build as a force provider to the warfight?
Well, again, the Space Force is you know, the mission of the Space Force is to organize, train, and equip and provide capabilities to U.S. Space Command. Previously, when I was the U.S. Space Command commander, I would say that U.S. Space Command will only be as good as the space capabilities that are presented to it. And so our primary near-term goal is to establish the force, build the organization, which we've done and we've planned to be able to move at speed. The second priority is to not just focus on establishing the force, but to deliver near-term goodness. And we've already done that in just the first 7 months on the job. And I think you're going to see a very clear focus on developing capabilities at speed and getting those capabilities in the hands of the warfighter.
When we talk about those capabilities, Chief, do you have a thought about how to manage the relatively limited pool of talent that exists today? As you know, there's a lot of competition in the civilian and military sector. We spoke with General McConville and General Brown about what we'll call transmissibility between components, Guard, Reserve, Active, to maintain that pool of talent. What's your thought about how you want to leverage those civilian skills in the reserve components across the enterprise and the Space Force?
Yeah, so let me just, it's a great question, and I think it's at the heart of what we're trying to do. As I mentioned before, the law, the National Defense Authorization Act, gives us a clean sheet of paper about how are we going to develop our people. And so we have an opportunity to do that, to do that differently. I think, when somebody comes into the Space Force, we're looking to develop a model that allows them to be in the Space Force full-time, transition over, maybe do a job at NASA, do a job with industry, transition to part-time with the reserve component, and have much more portability between the different segments. If you look at what the law said, the law gave us, one of the first things the law told us to do was to do a study on the reserve component for the Space Force. And so for the last few months, we've been working that. As I said up front, we rely very heavily on the Guard and Reserve today. We can't do our job without it, and we're not going to be able to do our job without it in the future. But it says, hey, take a look and see if there's some opportunities to do this in a different way that allows you to do just as your question highlighted or proposes, was how can you do this that gives you greater advantage, be able to move people back and forth and leverage it in a different way. I'm really excited about the results of the study that we've done. We're getting ready to brief that to the Secretary, the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Defense, and then we'll submit that report back to Congress.
Thanks, sir. You know, I can tell you as the chairman of the association, we have 11 states today engaged with force structure that primarily war traces their activity to the Space Force. And we just want to let you know we're ready to stand shoulder to shoulder for the formation of a Space Guard that you can access that also is underpinned by that principle of unity of command and the ability for us to respond to our states. If we've seen over the last few months how important that is with COVID-19 and civil unrest and all the rest. And we look forward to partnering with you in those endeavors. Finally, you know, on the Space Force, we know how important the digital backbone is and the way that cyber has become integrated into all of the joint domain warfight. How are you going to leverage the current competencies in Space Force that will also provide synergies with Cyber Command?
And we've got a really close partnership with Cyber Command. Again, let me talk in both. My former hat as the U.S. Space Command Commander. One of our closest partners was U.S. Cyber Command, and we worked very, very closely to develop that relationship. We actually are standing up an integrated planning element at Cyber Command to be able to increase that integration, and vice versa. Cyber was putting folks at U.S. Space Command to be able to do that. On the organized, train, and equip side, we're also working to develop partnerships with Cyber Command. And I'll tell you, there's been no better partners. We have worked very hard to embed, or one, to change how we do cyber in our service, getting after enterprise IT as a service, freeing up airmen at the time to do the cyber mission, to do defensive cyber operations, if you will, for space. And I think that's only going to continue into the future, and we're excited about the possibilities going forward.
Thanks, sir. You know, General Raymond, thank you again for taking the time to come and visit with us. You have a huge job ahead of you to construct this new Space Force. And it's the first military service in nearly 7 decades. And I just want to say to you that I think we can both agree the National Guard, our innovative spirit, the way we're embedded in our communities and industry is well positioned to be a building block of the Space Force of the future. And when you take that blank piece of paper out, we're glad to sit down with you and talk to you about how we can help you and manage expectations. So thanks again for coming and talking to our members.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Again, as I started with my talk up front, let me just say thank you to all the National Guardmen and women that serve our nation so well. Our nation has asked a lot of you, as I said up front, and you have delivered. You deliver for space each and every day as well. We can't do our job today without you, and we're going to need you into the future as well. So thanks, and thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thanks, sir. And again, as your other three partners on the Joint Chiefs have received today, you'll be receiving a laptop-shaped coin. It's on the screen in front of you there. It actually opens and closes in honor of our virtual conference. And thank you so much, sir, for taking the time to speak to our National Guard Association, and we appreciate the partnership you have with all of our service members.
Thank you.